November 4th, 2025, Cebu, Philippines. It is 4 in the morning, and the water is rising faster than anyone can run. A mother wakes to the sound of her neighbor screaming. She looks down. The floor of her home is gone. In its place, a black river, moving, alive, swallowing everything. She grabs her children and climbs to the roof in the dark. Around her, an entire city is drowning. Typhoon Kalmaigi has just slammed into the Visayas, and in a matter of hours, rivers that were supposed to be tamed by billions of pesos in flood control projects burst through their banks like they were made of paper. Cars are picked up by the current and stacked on top of each other like toys. Shipping containers float down residential streets. Concrete houses, homes that families spent their entire lives paying for, collapse into the water and disappear. By sunrise, the scale of the catastrophe becomes clear. More than 200 people are dead. Entire neighborhoods have been erased from the map. Rescuers in rubber boats pull bodies from the mud. Children, grandparents, whole families who went to sleep believing they were safe. And here is the part that turns grief into rage. They were supposed to be safe. On paper, this exact disaster should never have happened. On paper, the Philippine government had spent over 545 billion pesos on flood control projects since 2022. Thousands of dikes, river walls, and pumping stations. In fact, just 1 year earlier, the president himself stood before the nation and proudly announced the completion of more than 5,000 flood control projects. But as the floodwaters raged through Cebu, through Bulacan, through Metro Manila, investigators were uncovering a truth more disturbing than any storm. Many of those projects did not exist, not poorly built, not unfinished. They simply were not there. Ghost projects, walls that existed only in documents, dikes that existed only in photographs, billions of pesos paid in full for concrete that was never poured, while the people those projects were meant to protect drowned in their own homes. And when investigators followed the money, it did not lead to rivers or dikes. It led to mansions, to a garage filled with 40 luxury cars, to a Rolls-Royce, a Bentley, a 7 million peso crystal collection. And at the center of it all, one couple, a husband and wife who rose from absolute poverty to become two of the richest contractors in the Philippines in less than a decade. To understand how an entire country was left to drown, you first have to understand how they rose. Her story begins far from the Philippines, London, England, in the late 1970s. Cesara Rowena Cruz, the girl who would one day be known as Sarah Diskaya, is born to a Filipina chambermaid working in the city's hotels. There is no wealth here, no connections, no empire, just a mother scrubbing rooms in a foreign country, trying to keep her daughters fed. Sarah grows up on the bottom rung of one of the most expensive cities on earth. As a young woman, she reportedly works as domestic help, cleaning other people's homes, while her sister works in a dental clinic. They are invisible, ordinary, struggling. Then, in 2001, the world changes. The September 11th attacks send shockwaves through the global economy, and the family is forced to leave London and return to the Philippines. They settle in Pasig City, part of Metro Manila. And it is here that Sarah meets a man named Pacifico Diskaya, known to everyone as Curly. They marry. And they are poor. So poor that the newlyweds cannot afford their own home and have to live with Sarah's mother. If the story ended here, it would be unremarkable. Millions of Filipino families live this exact life. But then, something changes. The couple enters the construction business. And according to reports, family connections in Pasig politics open doors that would have stayed shut for anyone else, with local government projects flowing their way. The Diskayas would later deny that political ties fueled their rise. But what happens next is not in dispute, because it is written in government records. In 2012, their companies begin bidding for contracts with the Department of Public Works and Highways, the agency that controls the nation's infrastructure budget. In 2016, they enter a very specific line of business, flood control. And then the empire explodes. One construction company becomes two becomes 5. Eventually, the couple controls 9 construction firms. On paper, these are separate companies competing against each other. In reality, they all lead back to the same dinner table. And when these companies join government biddings, they win. Again. And again. And again. Between 2022 and 2025 alone, companies linked to the Discayas capture around 400 flood control contracts worth roughly 30 billion pesos. Two of their firms rank among the top contractors in the entire country. Out of a national flood control budget of 545 billion pesos, just 15 favored contractors corner about 20%. And the Discayas sit near the very top of that list. And they do not hide it. That is the astonishing part. In September 2024, Sarah and Curly sit down for a television interview and give the nation a tour of their lifestyle. 40 luxury vehicles, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, Cadillacs, a Maybach, Range Rovers. When the host asks what gateway led them to this life, Sarah's answer is disarmingly honest. She says it all began when they got into DPWH projects. A few months later, another celebrity interview showcases their lavish multi-story mansion, including Curly's crystal collection, with a single piece worth 7 million pesos. By 2025, Sarah Discaya wants more than money. She wants power. She runs for mayor of Pasig City against the wildly popular anti-corruption mayor, Vico Soto. She loses in a landslide, but the campaign puts her wealth under a spotlight she will never escape. Because while the Discayas were showing off their cars on television, the rivers of the Philippines were still rising. And people were beginning to ask a very dangerous question. If billions were spent on flood control, why does the country keep drowning? Which brings us back to the present, and to the moment the dam finally broke. July 28, 2025, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. delivers his State of the Nation address and does something no one expects. He turns on his own government. He reveals that a tiny group of contractors has cornered the flood control budget, and he names names. The list goes public. Sitting at numbers 2 and 3 are Alpha and Omega and St. Timothy Construction. The Discayas? Within weeks, the Senate opens an investigation, and the hearings become a national obsession. Under oath, Sarah Discaya admits to owning 9 construction companies and 28 luxury cars. Whistleblower contractors describe how the scheme allegedly worked. Money released for projects marked complete. Cash delivered back to public works officials in boxes. Engineers accused of signing off on structures that were never built. Then investigators start visiting the project sites. In Bulacan, they find ghost projects, flood defenses that were fully paid for and do not exist. In Davao Occidental, a 96 million peso river wall awarded to a Discaya company is found to have never been built at all, according to state inspectors. One former district engineer eventually turns over 110 million pesos in cash, admitting it came from kickbacks. The public reaches a breaking point. On September 21, 2025, hundreds of thousands of Filipinos flood the streets of Manila in what becomes known as the Trillion Peso March, demanding to know where their money went. And in a twist of fate, almost too cruel to believe, weeks later, the deadly November floods strike Cebu, killing hundreds in provinces dotted with paper dikes and phantom walls. Now, the fall. The government creates an independent commission led by a retired Supreme Court justice. Investigators freeze more than 13 billion pesos in assets. The Discaya's beloved luxury cars are seized by customs agents and auctioned off to the public. And on December 18, 2025, the woman who once gave television tours of her mansion is arrested over the Davao Ghost Project case, alongside a wave of public works officials. And the scandal keeps climbing. Charges are filed against a former congressman over an anomalous 289 million peso river project. And in 2026, the unthinkable happens. Senator Jinggoy Estrada and former Senator Bong Revilla, two of the biggest names in Philippine politics, are arrested in connection with the flood control scandal, with prosecutors recommending charges as serious as plunder. Even the former head of the Department of Public Works finds himself in custody. All of them deny wrongdoing, and their trials will decide their fate, but the message is unmistakable. The biggest corruption scandal in modern Philippine history is still unfolding, and officials are warning that more big names are coming. So, what is the final cost of all this? It is not just the 545 billion pesos. It is measured in drowned homes, in children pulled from floodwaters, in families sleeping on rooftops, waiting for rescue that comes too late. Every peso stolen from a flood control project was a brick removed from a wall that was supposed to stand between ordinary Filipinos and the water. The Philippines is hit by around 20 typhoons every single year. The storms will always come. That was never the question. The question was whether the money meant to hold back the water would ever actually touch concrete, or whether it would keep flowing quietly into mansions and garages while the rest of the country learned to swim. The rains will return. They always do. The only thing left to see is whether this time anything is standing when they arrive. If this story made you angry, that anger is the point. Share this video because the flood that destroys homes is water, but the flood that destroys nations is silence.